Good evening, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. It is really a great honor to be with all of you tonight, and especially with our esteemed guests, Elizabeth Lesser and Isabel Allende. Tonight's event is co-sponsored by our friends at the Decatur Book Festival and also by the Agnes Scott College Writers Festival. We've asked Dr. Nicole Statement, chair of the Agnes Scott College English Department and organizer of this year's 50th anniversary festival, to just share a little bit about what's going to make this year's festival so special. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you, ER, and thank you everyone for letting us co-sponsor this event. This is an exciting opportunity, and we absolutely love having Charis as our Agnes Scott bookstore just right across the street from campus. The Agnes Scott Writers Festival is commemorating its 50th anniversary this year. It is the longest continuously running literary festival in the Southeast. We have had dozens of very distinguished writers joining us over the last 50 years, including Pulitzer Prize winners and Poets Laureate. And we are thrilled to be welcoming back two very exciting guests this year. Rita Dev is going to be joining us as well as Jackie Goldfinger. So we've got two returning guests. We have a week's worth of exciting events. The Writers' Festival will be going on April 5th through April 11th with Rita Dev's poetry, both the archived event from 1991, as well as a brand new reading. Jackie Goldfinger will be giving a reading, and we are thrilled to stage the Georgia premiere of one of her plays. We also will be pairing with Charis Books to offer lots of other events and blasts from the past from our archive, as well as student ratings for the Writers' Festival contest, which is the centerpiece of the Writers' Festival. So we hope that you are able to join us. All of the events are virtual. They will be taking place on Zoom or Showtix4U, which is a specific kind of place. So for more information, we hope you'll visit calendar.agnescott.edu. Thank you to ER and to Charis, and I hope you all enjoy this event.
Thank you so much, Nicole. And again, thank you to all of you. I hope that if you're local to Atlanta or Decatur, that you'll join us for the Agnes Scott Writers Festival. But this is a special year, so wherever you're watching in the world tonight, you can join us virtually. So let's move on to our very esteemed guests. First, I'm going to introduce our interview partner, Elizabeth Lesser. Elizabeth is the author of several best-selling books, including Cassandra Speaks, When Women Are the Storytellers, The Human Story Changes, and Broken Open, How Difficult Times Can Help Us Grow, as well as Marrow, Love, Loss, and What Matters Most. She is the co-founder of Omega Institute, recognized internationally for its workshops and conferences in wellness, spirituality, creativity, and social change. She has given 2 popular TED Talks and is one of Oprah Winfrey's Super Soul 100, a collection of 100 leaders who are using their voices and talent to elevate humanity. So welcome, Elizabeth. It's a real special thing to have you here tonight.
Thank you.
And the person of the hour who has been such an important figure for so many of us. I'm already seeing in the chat people talking about the ways that Isabel's books have changed your lives. I love it. Keep those comments coming. Isabel Allende is best known for novels such as The House of the Spirits and City of the Beasts, but she is the author of dozens of books across genres. Allende has been called the world's most widely read Spanish language author. In 2004, Allende was inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and in 2010, she received Chile's National Literature Prize. President Barack Obama awarded her the 2014 Presidential Medal of Freedom, and we are gathered tonight to celebrate her newest book, The Soul of a Woman, Mujeres del Alma Mía. It is a crowning achievement on a life's work of feminism, of authorship, of so many things. And I think there's just so many lessons to be learned from this book. So I am thrilled for this conversation. The only thing I want to let folks know before I get out of the way is that you may ask a question at this ask a question box at the bottom center of your screen at any point. And if you see a question that has already been asked that is similar to something you might like to ask, please just upvote that existing question so we can avoid redundancy. Thank you all so much. And please take it away, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Oh, welcome everybody. I've been noticing in the chat there are people from all over the country, Puerto Rico, other countries. Just so great that you're here. And welcome, Isabel, my dear friend. So
how are you? And thank you so much for doing this, Elizabeth. I'm really touched.
Thank you. Yeah. So this book, I think this book is going to be a classic. I think it's going to be around for many years. I mean it. I mean, you know, I love your work. I've read everything. Every year I wait for your next book. I don't know how you are so prolific, but this book, I see someone wrote in the chat, I learned so much. What a book. I did not expect to learn so much. You know, the writing is so alive and tender and beautiful and in your style. So you get tricked. You trick us. It's a story. It reads like a story. But in the meantime, I was being so inspired and learning so much. So at the start of the book, you describe yourself as this defiant little girl and young woman. Even the nuns expelled you from school when you were 6 for insubordination. This is what you say. And you stood up to your grandfather and your stepfather, Ramon, and this agitated your mom, Panchita. And you write that your mother begged you, don't make Tata and Ramon angry, Isabel. Everything can be handled elegantly and without noise. And then you write, but there's no feminism without noise. So you've been making noise your whole life. Good noise, powerful noise, beautiful noise. So where did that come from? That urge to make noise, especially when it came to liberating yourself and other women and girls. Where did that urge to make noise come from?
I think it just came from anger. I was very angry, very young, at how unfair the world is, and I couldn't separate what part of the unfairness bugged me the most. But I knew that there was something about my mother being so vulnerable and so fragile and so without resources and being so smart. My mom was a smart woman, but she was born in 1920. She was not prepared for work. She was prepared to be somebody's wife and mother. And she was abandoned by her husband with 3 babies. So she returned to the house of her father and became a sort of charity case, I would say, because she didn't have any means of her own. And without my grandfather's protection, I don't know what she would have done. But I was also angry at the way the maids in the house were treated. They were women also, and they were so poor. They slept in some cells in the back. Everything was so unfair. The social classes in Chile irritated me from since I was a baby, I think, and it still does. I go back to Chile and I get so angry. It's like us in India, you know. So everything that was unfair made me angry. I suppose I was particularly sensitive, introverted, and not an easy child. I was solitary, lonely. I had 2 brothers and no sisters or no girls around me. It was a tough childhood. I wouldn't like to live one day of that childhood. Mm-hmm. But I learned a lot. I learned to be strong. I have internalized the voice of my grandfather in my head. And that was the school of stoicism. Tough, discipline, perform, don't whine, don't complain, don't talk about your ailments or your wishes or your desires. Nobody cares at all. And all that has served me well in my life. But I wish I didn't have that voice now that I'm 78 and I don't need that much discipline anymore.
So, can I tell the story of how we met?
Yes, I don't remember.
Okay. It was about 15 years ago. You're going to remember once I start telling it. I got this invitation in the mail to this strange sounding conference in Austria.
Oh, yes, I remember. Oh, it was awful.
It was a gathering of the leaders of religions and famous scientists. And I thought, oh, I'm not a religious leader and I'm not a scientist. Why are they inviting me? And I looked at everyone who was invited, and it was who was coming. It was the Dalai Lama and the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. And it was
a lot of priests, remember?
Priests and imams, and then all these Nobel-winning scientists, and only 2 women. All of them were men. And it was Isabel Allende. Now, we still don't know why in the world we were invited to this conference of religious leaders and scientists. But I thought, I want to go because I want to meet Isabel Allende. And also, it was on the Danube River, and that sounded kind of nice and romantic. So we get there, and it's all full of pomp and it's very fancy and very traditional. And the front rows are filled with priests from this abbey where it was being held, and businessmen in suits, and all these leaders, and you and me on the stage. And we had been told to write a 20-minute speech beforehand. And the question was, what will your legacy be? What do you want your legacy to be? And I thought, this was back before I'd met you, so I was still a good girl. I thought, okay, I don't really relate to this subject at all, but I'll write about legacy. So the first person to be asked to speak is you. And it's this big, tall podium, and you're short, and you get up to it, and the man says, so what do you want your legacy to be? And you said, legacy? As if you'd never heard the question. Legacy is a penis word. And all the priests and all the people in the audience gasped. And then there was silence. And then the Dalai Lama laughed out loud. And then you went on to explain that you didn't mean a penis word. You meant the other P word, patriarchy. That this idea that you're so important and special and you're going to leave a legacy, who cares? There's problems in the world. Stop thinking about yourself. And you went on to talk about patriarchy and the problems of it. And then I threw away my speech and said whatever I wanted because you inspired me so much. Anyway, I want you to talk about patriarchy. What does it mean? You spend a lot of time in this book explaining what it is. And you say feminism is not about replicating the disaster of patriarchy. It's about mending it. So tell us all about that.
Well, we should start by defining what patriarchy is. Patriarchy is a system of oppression that gives dominance and supremacy to the male gender over women, nature, other species, and many men, because not all men are the heads of the patriarchy. It's not sustainable, and it makes everybody miserable. And what is feminism? Feminism is an uprising against the system. So I keep telling everybody, this is not a war against men, especially not against young men, our children and our grandchildren, who can be part of this movement to change the world, to replace the patriarchy. This is a struggle, a war against the system. The system needs to change. And so that is my mission. That's what I've been trying to do all my life.
So this idea of not replicating the disaster of patriarchy, but
because the idea of replacing the patriarchy by a matriarchy, we don't know how that would work. It might have other problems. I think that the patriarchy needs to be replaced by a system, by a management of the world in which men and women in equal numbers can make the decisions with equal power, in which masculine and feminine values have the same weight in the society. And the combination of both of these values, of this energy that is the masculine and the feminine energy, can create a much better world, more sustainable, fair, compassionate, peaceful, and beautiful.
Yeah, because in another part of the book, you talk about how for women to get our foot in the door, sometimes we end up having to almost replicate the patriarchy just in order to have any kind of power, any kind of influence, but that's not the point.
No, because why do we have to do that? Because there's not a critical number of women in power. When we can name by name the prime ministers or the presidents in the world that are female, it's because you can count them with two hands. I mean, the critical look at Congress, look at the Supreme Court, look at everything. Women are in a minority, and they have to act like men in a system that was created by men to benefit men. So you have to fight with those weapons when you are into it, unless we have a critical number. And then the nature of power changes instead of power changing the nature of women.
Mm-hmm.
Which is not a sentence that I came up with. Somebody else said it. I am just
I think Mary Beard in that wonderful book, Women in Power. I love that book. Yeah. So you write that the poet and activist Sylvia Plath said her greatest tragedy was to have been born a woman, but you said, no, my greatest blessing was to be born a woman. And you also have called yourself a romantic feminist. And when I heard that, I was like, if someone asks me, what are you? That's what I'm going to say from now on. I'm a romantic feminist. So what do you consider the blessing of being a woman? Why do you consider it a blessing?
There are many blessings. First, I love being with women. We can meet, and in 5 minutes, we have an open heart to talk about things that really matter. We connect. We can be mothers. The most important thing that ever happened to me was to become a mother. And I don't like children. Can you imagine people who do like children? Now it must be wonderful. Yeah. I remember having my newborn babies at my breast as the greatest possible blessing. The things that my body can do are extraordinary. I love the accoutrements of makeup and clothes and romance and being girly girl. I love it. And that doesn't mean that I don't have a knife between my teeth to fight for those things I care for. Feminist is not the opposite of feminine. I think that they complement each other. And I think that feminism can be very sexy if you think of it not as an angry war, but a joyful war. We can do all this with joy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So here we are, these lovely, beautiful, wonderful beings, women. Why has there been so much violence against women, such a need to control women? The part of your book that goes into violence against women, the history of violence, it's harrowing to read. It's so tragic and so pervasive. So I'd love you to tell that story of what it was that gave you the impetus to start your foundation, the Isabel Allende Foundation. Like, how did that start?
Before I tell you that, let me answer the first part of your question. There is an ongoing, undeclared war against women. And we have to name it. We have to repeat it 1,000 times until there is global awareness of this tragedy, this humanitarian crisis that the war against women is. Women's bodies have become weapons of war. Rape has become a weapon of war. Women are sold into prostitution, premature marriage, forced labor. Women are abused in many ways. When a woman is tortured, it's called domestic violence, and it seems to be less. When a man is tortured, it's torture, and that's a human rights problem. So we need to create a world in which women are safe. We are born and raised with fear in our DNA, the fear of the male, the predator, any circumstance in which we can be vulnerable, we are scared. Even going into a bar to get a drink at night, which a man does without even thinking. For us, it's threatening. Walking alone in the campus at the university at night, oh, something can happen. You are threatened. So that part first, we have to deal about the violence and how women can be safe. And then they have to be valued. Women in many places are like cattle. They are less than cattle sometimes. My foundation, which started more than 20 years ago, I started because I wrote a book after my daughter Paula died. The book is called Paula, and it did very well. But I didn't want to touch any of the income that was coming from that book because it didn't belong to me. It belonged to Paula. And I needed to do something to honor her memory, but I didn't know what. And after I wrote the book, I went into this deep void. I don't call it depression because I've never been depressed, but sad, so incredibly sad. And my husband then, Willie, and my friend Tabra decided to take me to India to get me out of my comfort zone and maybe shake me up a little, you know. And the trip did it because India is such an extraordinary place. Just the color, the intensity, the sound, all that shook me to the bone, and I sort of woke up. We rented a car with a driver, and we were driving in rural Rajasthan, far away from everything, very hot. And the engine of the car was very warm, so the driver stopped to cool it with some water. And there was a tree nearby and some women under the tree with children. And my friend Tabra and I, we walked to the women. And as it always happens with women, we didn't share a language. We had nothing in common except the fact that we were women. So we approached them, and they started touching Tabra's hair because she had purple hair. And we had bought some bracelets in the market, and we gave them the bracelets. And after a few minutes, the driver honked, and we were supposed to go back to the car. And as we were walking to the car, one of the women handed me a sort of bunch of rags. And I thought she was trying to give me something back for the bracelets. And I said, no, thank you. Not necessary, something like that. But she wouldn't take it back. So I opened these rags, and inside was a newborn baby. I don't think the baby was more than 1 day old. The umbilical cord was there, raw, and it was tiny, like a premature little thing. And I blessed the baby and kissed the baby and tried to give it back to the mother, but she wouldn't take it. She backed up. So at that point, the driver came, took the baby from my hands and gave it to some other woman, and then dragged me to the car. And he had already started the car. We were driving away when I could react. And I said, why would that woman give me her baby? And the driver said, was a girl. Who wants a girl? And that was the moment when I knew what I was going to do with the money I had saved and with the income of my other books for the rest of my life. And I created a foundation that is run by my daughter-in-law, Lori Barra. She does a beautiful job. And the mission of the foundation is to help women like that woman who had to give her baby away because she couldn't give her a future. And that little girl who haunts me to this day, because I don't know if she's still alive. What happened to her? Can you imagine the life she had? I couldn't help her, so I have tried through the foundation to help others like them.
Wow. That's a beautiful story.
It's a terrible story. It's a terrible story.
And a beautiful one, taking trauma and trying to turn it into some kind of service and gift. Do you think, what do you think Paula would say?
Paula would be running the foundation with Lori, fighting with Lori, I'm sure.
So I was so glad in the book you addressed that age-old, ridiculous question that's been a favorite of everything from Freud to that story, that Persian story, and your grandfather, the question, what do women want? As if the answer isn't like, well, go and ask a woman what she wants. And believe her. But you decided you would Google the question, what do women want? So what did you find when you Googled it? And then if someone asked you, what do women want? What do you think in our souls? Because this book is the soul of a woman. What do we want in our souls? But what did you find when you Googled it?
When I Googled it, I got all the porn sites and advice to men of how to get laid and how to, So women want tough guy, muscular, tell them what you want and don't accept any no's. And they love when you are tough, all that kind of. I'm sure it doesn't work with anybody, but that's the advice I got in the internet. So I decided that I would start asking my women friends to see if they wanted the same things I want. And I came up with a very short list, actually. And that short list would be, I think, the same answer if I asked the question to a young man today. It's what human beings want. What is the soul of a human being craving for? We crave for safety. We want to be safe, to live in a world in which we are safe. And that means we have to live in peace. Because peace, which is a human creation, is absolutely not necessary and creates most of the misery in the world. We want to have control over our bodies and our fertility and our resources. So we want to have enough resources to support ourselves and, if possible, our children too. Because if we depend economically, if we don't have anything, if we live in poverty, we are vulnerable. And that is something that is very human, to have that. We also want to be interconnected because we are gregarious animals. We cannot live in isolation. And the whole point of the patriarchy is to separate people, not isolate them, but separate them in groups, classify them by race, by ethnicity, by nationality, by religion, by age, by gender, so that we are little groups, not powerful. If all these little groups got together, the patriarchy would disappear in 24 hours. So what do we want? To be interconnected. Of course, and we also want love and beauty and joy, which is like what animals have, what nature offers. Most people do not have it in this world.
Isn't that amazing? We want the most simple thing, beauty and joy, tenderness, and most people don't have it. Well, I loved when you said that it's what men really want to, especially the young men. I mean,
the old ones who have to wait until they die off. There's nothing we cannot do with them. There are a few enlightened ones, but not many.
I have sons, and you have your beautiful son. And the younger generation of men, at least the ones that I'm around, so hopeful to me. Just so exciting. I see the way my sons are fathers. They are so engaged, and it just makes me, that's one of the things that gives me a lot of hope. Younger men now.
Well, and young women who will not put up with the stupid macho stuff that we put up when we were young.
Right.
Yeah, they won't.
Yeah, like I look at my daughters-in-law, they don't ask their husbands to babysit for them. They expect something that I, as a young mother, was so afraid to ask for what I needed and wanted. So yeah, younger men and women are doing it very differently than our generation did. And
that's why I say that this is not a war against the male gender, because it isn't. I mean, it is against a system. the system, which doesn't benefit anybody, needs to be changed. And we are living in a world with the same institution, the same laws, the same beliefs of the 19th century or the Middle Ages. And we are in the 21st century where everything has changed. So I do hope that after this pandemic, when we have had the unusual experience of having a global event that is truly global, because we have had pandemics before. But for example, the influenza pandemic in 1918 in Europe and the United States arrived in Chile in 1920 because the connections were very different then. But now what happens in a town in China happens in a week to the rest of the world. So this global experience has taught us a huge lesson. The lesson that we are just one human family in one fragile planet. So I do hope that when we go back to normalcy, it will be a different normalcy from the one that we had before. I don't think it will happen immediately, but the lesson will carry on. And in a very near future, we will see extraordinary changes.
I agree. I'm very hopeful, even though everything is very scary and difficult and dangerous. But at the same time, I do feel winds of change. And I tend to be a romantic feminist. So
and an optimist,
Yeah. You know, one of the parts of the book that I hope everyone, no matter how old they are, loves it, but I really loved it being in my 60s, the way you talked about aging. You know, they say books change your life, and people sometimes tell me that about my books, and I don't really believe them. So I don't expect you to believe this, but it changed the way I feel about myself as an aging woman. And that makes me want to cry with gratitude for you. Mm-hmm. I feel very grateful. I just feel different about myself. I feel much more accepting, even excited to amplify the wonderfulness about being an older person, and to refuse the culture's idea that when you're older, you are invisible and you are inconsequential and invalid. Your fighting spirit as an older woman is very inspiring to me. And one of the real refreshing things to me around the topic of aging is that you included some things in it that people are usually afraid to talk about. One is death, and the other is sex. Now, I know
both are essential.
I know most people would rather you probably talk right away about sex, but I want you to talk about death. You can talk about sex after death, but you know, it's my proclivity to want to go to the death. So you write, since my daughter died, I am perfectly aware of death's proximity. And now in my 70s, death is my friend. It's not that she looks like a skeleton armed with a scythe and trailed by a rotten odor. She is a mature and elegant lady who smells of gardenias. At first, she was lurking in the neighborhood, then in the house next door, and now she's waiting patiently in my garden. Sometimes when I pass in front of her, she reminds me that I should enjoy this day as if it were my last. So talk to us about this elegant lady who smells of gardenias. Anything else she tells you, but also I want to know, do you talk to Paula and Panchita and Ramon and your grandfather and others who have passed over? What's your relationship with this lady who smells of gardenias and your ancestors?
My ancestors, and Paula, who is my descendant, not my ancestors, are all around me. I have their photographs all over the house. In the bathroom, where I have all my makeup, I have my mother and my daughter Paula, both dressed in wedding gowns, because at 80-something, my mother wanted to be a bride. So I have a wonderful picture of her dressed as a bride, all in white with flowers. So they are there, and every morning I say good morning to them. But even before that, When I wake up in the morning, I wake up very early. And I wake up in bed between my husband and my two dogs, warm, dark. And there's this feeling of immense gratitude for the day that begins, the night that ended, and the lady with the gardenias that is waiting for me. And I'm not afraid of death. I'm afraid of decrepitude, of being dependent, but not of death. My parents died, my mother of 98 and my stepfather of 102, both in my arms. And the transition was very similar to the moment when my granddaughter was born. And I took her out of the mother and cut the umbilical cord. And there was a moment of you've been a midwife. You know that, Elizabeth. There's something sacred. There's a sort of stillness in the air. Everything stops to welcome that child that comes to the world. And when my parents died and when Paula died, everything stopped. There was the same stillness, the same sacred moment, the same effort, and then the transition that was luminous. So I'm not afraid of the lady at all.
So beautiful. Okay, now you can talk to us about sex.
Ask a precise question.
Okay. People, you say in the book how people expect that older women, older people aren't sexual beings, aren't sensual beings, and that your most recent marriage has proved otherwise to you. So maybe talk to us about Roger. You talk about him in the book, and just sort of what it's like to be an older woman in love and sensual.
My grandfather died, he was almost 100. And he used to say, and so did my Tio Ramon, my stepfather, that sex never goes away. The curiosity, the impulse, you may not be able to perform, but you want it. That is what my stepfather would tell me all the time. And it's not something that only happens to men. To women, it happens way less because culturally and biologically, we are not so promiscuous. We do not need sex all the time as supposedly men do. But for us, the connection is really important. And the most intimate, profound connection that you can have with another human being is through good sex. I mean, loving sex. But also, I can only compare it with when you have a newborn baby, and that feeling that the baby is you and you are the baby. That connection that happens when you make love loving, and that can happen at any age. And you don't have probably the acrobatics of 30s, but you have other things. You have patience. You know each other. You have good humor. You have a glass of wine. Personally, I have marijuana, which helps a lot. I know it's not legal in other parts of the country, but here it is. So I'm not committing any crime. and I think that the connection that gives me with my husband is extraordinary. Why would I not have it? Now, seen from another perspective, I mean, if somebody, I don't want my son to hear this because he would be shocked that I'm talking about.
No, nothing you could say would shock anyone who knows you. We all heard it.
He would be shocked because I'm sure he thinks that we have a sort of white marriage, and it isn't so white. It's beige.
Okay, so before we go to some of our friends' questions, you talked about this a little already, but this is the most beautiful passage at the end. I just want to read it, okay? Every morning when I wake up, after greeting Paula, Panchita, and other present spirits when the room is still dark and silence, I call back my soul, which is still roaming in the land of dreams, and I give thanks for all I have, particularly for love, good health, and writing. And I also give thanks for the rich and passionate life I have and will continue to have. I'm not ready to pass the torch, and hopefully I never will be. I want to light the torches of our daughters and granddaughters with mine. They will have to live for us as we lived for our mothers, and carry on with the work still left to be finished. So, do you feel you were able to finish some work that your mother wasn't able to do? And what do you most hope our daughters and granddaughters will be able to finish what we were unable to?
I could live part of the feminist movement that my mother missed because she was born 20 years before. And by the time feminism arrived in Chile, and by the time I could sort of lecture to her about it, she wasn't ready. It took many years for her to understand what I was doing. And she would say, I understand, but she never really participated. And I think that my generation had the hard chore of carrying feminism to another stage. We had suffragettes before that fought for women's vote, but it was the feminist movement, through, especially after the pill was invented and we had some control of our fertility, that moved the movement. Now what I see is this new wave of young women who are fierce, and they know exactly what they want, and they are in the streets protesting, and they are the Me Too movement. And you know what is very interesting? I had a conversation with Alicia Garza, who is one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter. And we were talking about how these movements intersect, because they're all victims of the patriarchy. So in her book, The Purpose of Power, she says, well, if we want the Black community to change the circumstances, they have to have power. And power is politics. You have to get involved in big numbers. You have to participate. And I think that young people today, and I say young people because it's transgender, it's LGBT, it's young men, it's everybody, are trying to do that, participate. And in that participation, there is power. It can shake everything. I don't think I will see in my lifetime the end of the patriarchy, but I think that I will see it challenged to the extreme, and that my granddaughters will finish the work. But the work will continue, because it's very interesting. Every time that there is a crisis of any kind, in this case it's the pandemic, but it could be war, occupation, a hurricane, a catastrophe of any kind, women lose their rights. There is a terrible backlash against women. The first ones to lose their jobs and the last one to get them back will be women during the pandemic. They are stuck at home with their kids, doing all the work in poverty because they are unemployed, and many of them are even hungry, and many of them with an abuser in the house. So you have a predator in the house and domestic violence, and no one to ask for help. So for women, it's always hard. So my granddaughters will have achieved a lot, but they will have to be vigilant, because things can change in 24 hours, as we know.
Absolutely. I so agree. All right, let's see if we have some questions here. So Becky asks, how do we convince men to participate in dismantling patriarchy? I feel like it'll take a very proactive approach on the part of men. And I'm not especially seeing that in the realm of politics where I work.
There are more women in politics now, and more awareness. Now, for example, harassment. In my generation, when I was young, the word didn't exist. It was Anita Hill who brought the idea that a woman who is molested in the office, sexually harassed, that should not be allowed. Before it was taken, I mean, it was natural. That happened. If you want to work outside the house, that will happen to you too. Well, like that, many other things are being questioned. And young men today understand that much better than the older guys. The older guys, as I said before, they will start dying one by one. But the young ones who were brought up by women and grandmothers like myself, and what my daughter would have been, they are different. They are different, and they are easily convinced. You can talk to them. Those who are so macho that you cannot even talk to them, start asking questions. Don't confront them. Because if you confront them, they close down even more. But just ask questions. You know, it's very interesting. I had a conversation with an extraordinary woman called Arlie Hochschild. She is a great writer, and she has written about human relationships, really. She has spent years in the south of the country living in rural communities that are the people who vote for Trump and who believe the conspiracy theories and all that. And instead of trying to convince them that might be a crazy idea, she asks why. She sits with them and tries to understand why they think that way. And there is a connection. But we live in a world now that is so polarized that we don't want to listen what the other part has to say. And we are so angry that there are no bridges. But if we don't start by establishing a connection and a conversation, nothing changes.
Yeah. I also think the question of how do you make men want to dismantle the patriarchy, some of the answer for me is men are missing out on so much by having to prove their masculinity all the time. It doesn't serve them either. You know how we say to little girls, you can be anything a boy can be. But we never say to boys, you can be anything a girl can be, and explain to them the joys and the wonders of putting down this need to constantly prove your masculinity, your macho, your toughness, you don't cry, you don't know your emotions, and explaining to them the benefit that men and boys would have to no longer have shame to flaunt their feminine sides.
Well, for that, Elizabeth, we need to live in a society in which masculine and feminine values have the same weight and are respected equally, which is not the case. When we say that something is feminized, it's diminished, it's less. What I find really interesting is that here in the Silicon Valley, I live in Northern California, where all the techie people are, and nobody's older than 30. And you would expect to have parity, gender parity in a place like that. No, it's a very macho place. Mm-hmm. And they are all very young. So that worries me a lot, because when there is power and money involved, the worst of the macho thing emerges.
Yeah, and so part of the answer is getting involved politically and getting involved in leadership. But part of it, I feel, is for women to be proud of our own values and not to think that to be powerful, we have to also prove our masculinity, to elevate our value system.
And mostly raise our kids differently.
Yeah.
Raise our boys and our girls to share, not the girls to serve and the boys to boss around. We have to raise them differently. Now, for us, it's easy, Elizabeth, because we are educated, we live in a world where that is possible. Most of the world is not possible. Right. Women would not have the power to raise children differently, or the knowledge.
Mm-hmm. All right, so here's a question. Is there a lesson to learn from the domestic violence that has occurred during the pandemic? What do you think? The fact that I think the questioner means there's been so much more domestic violence during the pandemic. So what does that say to you about violence against women during a traumatic time?
What I said before, there is an undeclared war against women. And whenever there are no ways of controlling it, of containing it, it goes wild. And you have that, as I said before, in times of crisis, of any crisis. You have it in a country that is occupied by the military or militia, so you have violence against women rampant. Women are very vulnerable when they are alone. When they get together, they are invincible. But we are not together. And during the pandemic, we are isolated at home. We don't have resources. If a child is hurt at home, suffers domestic violence, the teacher will see bruises in school and report it.
Right.
Now the kids are not in school. If a woman suffers domestic violence, she can go to a community clinic, she can go to a shelter. There are certain things that she could do. They don't always do it because they're so scared that they don't, but the resources are there. During the pandemic, you're isolated at home. So when I say that it's so important to be interconnected, is because in a group, we are so much more powerful and stronger and safer.
Okay, here is maybe the last question, because we're getting near to the end of our hour. But you've been married 3 times. What have you learned from each marriage?
I can tell you what I'm learning now because I probably forgot the other ones. People ask me all the time, how is it to fall in love at your age? Well, it's exactly the same as falling in love when you are 30 or 40, but with a sense of urgency. I have no time to waste. I don't have time for jealousy, for petty little fights, for intolerance, impatience. I have to let go of a lot of stuff. There are certain things about Roger that bug me, of course. But then I think, am I going to tell him and have a little fight about this? It's not worth it. Let's not ruin the day. When we were talking about the lady, the gardenia lady in the garden, she's telling me, you have another day, use it well. And so I want to use my day well in this love affair by being kind, by being funny, by being tolerant, helpful, being a good companion, and doing for him what I want him to do for me. And it's working pretty well. Now, in my other marriages, I married very young to the father of my children and was in love with him for 20 years and had 2 wonderful children. And then the marriage collapsed when we went into exile. The marriage just dissolved. And we stayed together 9 more years to try to make it work. And it didn't. And we eventually separated. Then I fell in lust with Willie and moved to his house without an invitation and forced him into marriage within 6 months because I needed a visa to stay in this country and sponsor my children. So he married me and we remained married for 28 years. 20 years I was in love and I think it worked pretty well. The last 8 years trying to save something that was not possible to save. So now that I'm with Roger, I'm 78 years old. I'm thinking 20 more years of love. I'll be 98. Then at 100, I might marry again. Who knows?
It reminds me of what the last sentence somewhere in the book talking about aging. You said, this is the age of kindness.
Kindness goes a long way at any age, but at this age of mine, it's more important than anything else. More important than intelligence, than health, than anything.
Too bad that it takes a whole life to learn that.
Learn that.
It's a bad plan. Someone did not plan this very well. We should.
We learn kindness from our pets, and we learn to love our pets unconditionally, and they love us back. I wish we could translate that into our human relationships, that acceptance.
Yeah. Anything else you would like to say before we close out our hour together, Isabel?
Thank you, Elizabeth, because I'm so happy to have a conversation with you, my dear friend. And I have to say, your latest poem is here on my shelf. Every year, on January 7th, more or less, right before I start writing, Elizabeth sends me a poem that comes to her. Explain how you get the poem.
Well, I know that you're going to start writing. I know the date every year that you're going to start writing. I don't know how it started. I think I've been doing it for
years.
I just get this, I just say, what might help Isabel unlock the new book? I mean, I can't believe you write a book every year. I find it, I'm very jealous. But anyway, I think I'm just going to sit here and some message is going to come through for Isabel. You know, I don't know, maybe it's from your ancestors. I don't know who it's from. And I just write it down. And for some reason it rhymes. It always rhymes. And it's short. And I just write you a poem. And then Lori frames it with some.
Yeah, Lori frames the poem so that I can have it very close to my computer. I refer to the poem because it's like a roadmap, not for the writing always, but for the year. It's almost like having my own astrologer that tells me my destiny in rhyme verse. It's beautiful, Elizabeth. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's something. I just think of it as something women do for each other. You know, like I see your soul. I love your soul.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I love yours.
Well, okay, everyone. Thank you for joining. And please, I don't know if I did justice to how amazing this book is. It's really a little masterpiece, and I hope everyone buys it. I think it would help everyone the way it helped me. Men, women, all genders, all ages. Okay. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you both so much. I'm just popping back up to say you can click this teal button at the bottom of your screen and explore all of Isabel's books. So as I said, there's more than 20 to explore. I'm sure you've missed one or two, so check them out. They're all also, of course, available from your library. They're available in Spanish language editions, many of them as well from Charis. So if you speak Spanish as your first language, or if you are trying to learn Spanish, that is a lovely way to engage with these books. Please do just click this button. And I just want to thank you all for being with us. We really, really appreciate it. This has been such a generous evening. I'm also going to put a link in the chat to all of Elizabeth's books, because many of you know her best for Broken Open. That's been a book that's been really a gift to so many people in our community. We just continue to sell it over and over and over again through the years, but you may be less familiar with her new book. So we hope, because it came out during the pandemic, so we hope that you'll explore it and continue to visit with us. So if you're new to Charis, please just check out our whole list of events. We're extra busy during March because of Women's History Month, but we are busy year round. So I'm grateful to all of you who are doing the work to dismantle patriarchal ways of thinking in the world, in all of the different ways that people have mentioned in the chat. But I'm especially grateful to both of you for this conversation tonight. So thank you all. I hope you stay safe and well, and continue to be healthy and write more books, because they are such gifts to us. So good night, everyone.